So Sandra is the author of the debut novel, Wednesdays at 1. I think we just took a picture, right? Everyone's got the book. This novel has been chosen as a Publisher's Weekly Summer Buzz Book, a Best Book Club selection from Book Trib. Did I say that correctly? A Best July Book from Good Morning America, and a July Apple Books Editor's Pick. Apple Books called it a fast-paced and chilling, a brilliant mystery about lies, shame, and secrets. Sandra also authored the award-winning memoir Trove, which we also have in store too, A Woman's Search for Truth and Buried Treasure. Sandra's essays and articles have appeared in over 100 publications, including the Washington Post, the Christian Science Monitor, Writer's Digest, and Boston Globe magazine, for which she was a regular correspondent. I mean, that's simple. And I was telling her, maybe I won't get emotional. So speaking of her other articles, I read an article that I can't remember what it was published in, but it was about the last breakfast she made for her daughter on her last day of high school. And it was just so it hit me personally. You should Google it and read the article. It's just really wonderful. I have some quotes that I plan to ask you about after, but I won't make it like that.
Emotional kid stories are my brand.
Where was I? Oh, this is interesting. One of her personal essays was also turned into a short film called Wait, and it stars Kerry Washington, and it was directed by Trudy Styler. And she's lived and taught abroad for many years, and she currently teaches writing at UMass Lowell. And then we have Wendy, who was a practicing attorney, right? But after the birth of the first of her 3 sons, the desire to write a novel was strong. And now she's the author of the psychological suspense novels, All Is Not Forgotten, Emma in the Night Before, and Don't Look for Me. Her novels have been translated into 23 foreign languages and have topped bestsellers lists both nationally and abroad. They've been featured on the Today Show, the Reese Witherspoon Book Club, and the Book Club of the Month, and have been optioned for television and film. And her newest book that we have right there, What Remains, was just released. I think it was mid-June, June 9th.
June 13th.
13th. So after this conversation, so don't fret, we're going to open up the floor for Q&A. I have some of my own Q&A, but I'll table that so let everyone have a chance. We'll monopolize it. So gather your questions, and then also know that after the event, we're going to have a book signing line, so you'll be able to connect with both authors personally across the way and have your books personalized. So once again, thank you so much for supporting your local independent bookstore. It means a lot. All right. Thank you.
Right. So thank you all for being here. This is a full house. This is amazing. So well done, drawing in the crowds everywhere. The book is off to an amazing start. But I wanted you to talk first about your connection to this area. So you have family in Madison, and tell us your connection.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I just want to thank RJ Julia for hosting me tonight, because my roots do go very deep here in this town. My dad actually grew up on the land that is now Meg's Point over at Hammonasset. So how many locals are here who know Hammonasset well? So he grew up on a farm there, and he spent his entire life, from his first job as a lifeguard at Hammonasset through till his death in 1984, when he was the director of state parks and recreation in Connecticut.
Oh.
And he did some amazing things to secure his environmental legacy. But one of the most significant was he had dunes erected at Hammonasset. He had the parking lot moved several hundred yards back. This was in 1964, the year I was born. So he was kind of busy that year. And he had the parking lot moved back. It pissed a lot of people off in the Hartford office where he worked. And he erected dunes along Meg's Point at Hammonasset, which you can still see today. And Wesleyan geologists credited my dad with having saved the beach. That stretch of beach exists. And after he died, I was in college. I was 19 when he passed away. They named the campground the William F. Miller Campground, which you can drive by the sign. So to speak to your question, my dad's family's here, my mom's family's here, my cousin is here tonight. She helped bring out the crowds. But as far as Hammonasset goes, I lost my dad before I really had a chance to know him, and we didn't have a really good relationship or a deep emotional connection. But when I go to Hammonasset, I get connected to those memories and that really deep emotional place. I will walk the beach every year. I try to do this and kind of reflect on my dad, what we had, what we didn't have. And I often think maybe he didn't have that really kind of father-daughter relationship that I yearn for, but he left this beautiful environmental legacy for so many people in the state of Connecticut to enjoy. And it goes to my writing too, because when I go to Hammonasset, I feel like I have to draw on, as a writer, you know this, you have to draw on your own emotional stories for good or ill, right? The hard ones, the beautiful ones, the worst ones, to actually create your characters. And everything I write practically has a dad, and it's like a dad connection, a troubled dad connection, including this book. So the long way to say that is I feel deeply connected to Madison, to Hammonasset, and to this area.
Yeah. See, now I want to skip all of my questions and go to question number 5, which is talking about the father in the book. So we met before this, and I was going over my questions, and I was like, it's just going to go out the window. It just always does. So, but I'm not. No, we're going to set it up because how many people here have read the book? Okay, so not a lot, not a majority. So there will be no spoilers. And so we are going to stick to the script, and we're going to start by having you describe this book. And I just want to say that when I interview a lot of thriller writers, that's my genre is really strictly thrillers. This is really a hybrid. It's a suspenseful, it's a family story, but it's really a story about secrets, about forgiveness, about the legacy of childhood that can stay with you throughout your life. It's about a marriage. It's about so many things, and it does have a twist, which we can't talk about. Sorry, but set up the plot for us.
Yeah, sure. So Gregory Weber is a clinical psychologist, and he's burdened by the guilt and shame of this horrible thing that he did when he was 17 years old. Something that nobody else knows about, at least nobody else who's alive. So he has a very privileged life in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I live up in the Boston area and based it in sort of those neighborhoods. And but this lie of omission has infected his marriage. So he hasn't told his family, he carries the shame. And he's in his office one day, and a woman appears. It's a Wednesday at 1 o'clock, which is supposedly his free hour. And she knows things about his past that she absolutely shouldn't know. And so the story carries from there. And it's driven by this idea of who is this woman, Mira, who appears every Wednesday at 1, and how is she connected to Gregory? And he is, it turns his life around, and it sort of reverses the roles, where he falls into the client role and she falls into the therapist role, as he's desperate to understand this connection to his past. So.
Yeah. And we're going to go into all of those issues that you just raised, and the father. I'm not going to forget that one. But I want to ask how this story came to be. What was the inspiration for it? And when did you write it? Because you had written a memoir, and you teach writing, and you've written stories. So, but how did this novel come to be?
Okay, so here's a good story, and my husband gave me all permission to tell this. So 27 years ago, when we were just dating, before we were married, he called me one day from work. And this is landline days. And he said,
Okay, tell everybody what he does.
He's a clinical psychologist. He has read the book, and well, okay, that's another story. So he called me one day from work, and he said, shut the windows. And I went over, shut the window, came back to the phone, and he said, I think somebody's been listening outside of our house, like, summer days with the windows open. And And she's coming in, a client of mine, and she's coming into my office and she's talking about the things she's heard. So before he could just jump to a conclusion, he had to sort of sort it all out, which in the end turned into this 4-year nightmare / stalking ordeal that really impacted our family in a very, very negative way. As you can well imagine, she stole our mail. She broke into our house when we were on vacation. She filled our answering machine tapes, for those of you who remember those. But I was fascinated not by this horrible woman who felt proprietary toward my husband's home life, but I was fascinated by this idea of a psychologist. Here's the writer brain in me, right? We're getting stalked. Our lives are turned upside down. And I'm like, there's a novel here somewhere. So I was fascinated by the idea of turning the tables on a person, like in this case, a clinical psychologist. What if somebody comes in and puts him in the vulnerable position? Typically in a therapy session, right? The vulnerable one is the client. And what if the client is suddenly in control and then the therapist is vulnerable? So I was really intrigued by that idea. The seed kind of embedded itself in my little fiction brain there, again, 27 years ago. And I tried to work with it in various forms from the female perspective, from the perspective of the female client. And it wasn't until the pandemic and the summer of 2020, remember, there was nothing to do, right? No parties, no barbecues. You couldn't go anywhere. You could, in my case, I stayed in my basement and I wrote every morning. And the story came to me like a fully formed download, almost like it had been gestating for 27 years. And I was able to write that story, the novel, that summer. I wrote 1,000 words a day. You had to stop me at 1,000 words. And in 3 months I had a book. And here was a book that I kind of grappled with, like an idea I grappled with for 27 years. And there it was in the quiet of that pandemic summer. So, yeah.
And it's what's amazing about this book is that all the pieces just fit together. And I don't know if you normally would plot this book. It sounds like was sort of an unusual process, but I have to plot. Some people, what they call pantsers, so they just sort of fly by the seat of their pants and they just start writing and they have a character in mind or a premise. But this book is so cohesive. So there are so many themes. There's a marriage, and it's impacted by his secret and his, how he's walked through life, not able to really show people who he really is because of this secret. And so he can't accept their love. He can't feel their love, even his family. And when the book begins, we find him in this compromised emotional situation, but otherwise pretty steady.
Yeah.
And then Mira, the patient, rocks his world. But so many pieces fit together just perfectly throughout. It's just a seamless exploration of his mental state, his past, but also what this woman sort of unearths in him. And so it must have been sort of resonating for all those years because it's really cohesive. Do you normally, when you think about a book, do you normally plot for a while before you write? Do you sometimes just sit down and start writing and it comes like a download?
Yeah, I think this was a one-off, like if writers get a gift, right? This was it. And I was obnoxious about it too, because I would say, every morning I would write. And then my other writer friend would be like, it's the pandemic, I can't write. And my friend Lisa's like, you and Taylor Swift were the only ones who were productive in that pandemic. And I was like, kind of true, we were. So, but it was a little bit obnoxious, but does anybody know that book, I was going to say The Writer's Way. It's not The Writer's Way. It's wow.
Bird by Bird?
No. It's the 50-year anniversary, the creative book. The Artist's Way. Thank you. Yeah. So does anybody know that book? It's a beautiful book, and if you're trying to create anything, it's fantastic. And I actually had a very terrible case of vertigo in the spring of 2020, and I couldn't write. I couldn't look at the computer, which was hard because I was teaching online after we all moved from classroom stuff to online teaching. So, but I did The Artist's Way, and I would do the morning pages every morning. You just write longhand, 3 pages. And after I did that for 3 months, the vertigo cleared and then the book came in. And I think there was something, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about it. She credits Eat, Pray, Love she credits The Artist's Way for Eat, Pray, Love. And a lot of like fabulously well-established writers and creatives say the same thing. So I feel like credit, I can't believe I can't remember her name. Artist's Way.
Julie Cameron, yeah.
Thank you, Christopher. So yeah, so I
What does she say in that book? I need to get.
you do, everybody should. It's really, if you do morning pages, you scribble 3 pages longhand before you get up, and you don't filter it, you don't think through it, you don't, cognate, you just scribble.
Yeah.
In my case, because I had such vertigo, I closed my eyes and I would just scribble. And you're not plotting a book, you're not making sense, but it opened something in me. So I feel like I went through that, and then the universe was like, here, okay, fine, I'll give you a book. And so I got a book, and now I'm trying to write my next book, and it's really hard. The previous book was a memoir, so all I had to do was like live a complicated, complex, dysfunctional, joyful, crazy life, and that was,
Yeah.
that came together easily.
I think a lot of writers experience that when and across the board, whether you're a plotter or a pantser, whatever walk of life you come from. I was not a trained writer. I never thought I would be a writer. I was a lawyer, so I wrote lawyerly things. But I think for everyone there is the best moments, the plot twist you've been waiting for, the piece of dialogue you can't get quite right. They always seem to come when you're, waiting in line at the dry cleaner, or
Is that what happens for you?
always,
Yeah.
always. And it's so frustrating because I'm such a control freak, and I I was a type A lawyer. So I'm like, I sit down and I concentrate and everything gets done. And you can't do that with writing. You really can't. It's so frustrating, right?
There's, and also Elizabeth Gilbert, a big plug for her because she needs to sell more books. Her book, Big Magic, she talks about that there's like magic and fairy dust in writing, and you can't explain it. I mean, something else weird that happened to me, I just published an article about it in LitHub, was that after I wrote the book, and I'm not kidding, I won't go into details, things in the book started to come true in very, very strange ways. That started to play out. And
Like what? Oh, you can't tell me because it's
Um,
spoilers.
well,
Can you tell us?
I can tell you one thing that's kind of a clear example. So I created Gregory and his father, of course, the troubled father-son relationship. And after I did it, I put the father on a ventilator, and you'll read the book. And I just came up with this idea. Right after that, looking at my sister-in-law Anne back here, my father-in-law, healthy at 82, suddenly had a heart condition. It was on a ventilator. And as I was working on this scene, researching ventilators for my book and how it would be, my husband was in the next room talking to my father-in-law's nurse about how it was on a ventilator. And then, okay, spoilers, but strange things started to unfold. And I do think that we don't talk about it a lot because writers, I don't know, it sounds a little bit woo-woo. Yeah. And that's actually the technical term. And it is a woo-woo, but it's also true. True. So,
Yeah, no, and I
Have you had the experience?
not of things coming true, but of
other things coming true. Yeah, absolutely. And I chalk it up to brain chemicals and brain science, and when different parts of your brain, when it's resting, and the way we have dreams that bring out things that we're trying to suppress, or anxieties, or and they will manifest in a dream. So I give it a more technical term, but it's a little woo-woo, yes, and it does happen to me.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think it's just such a it is such a magical moment when you have when things come together like that. And I'm picturing you writing in your basement during the pandemic. And do you think that weighed into the decision to make the characters sort of mirroring your life in the structure, not in their personalities or what happens to them, but set in the Boston area, Gregory's a therapist, psychologist, your husband is as well.
Yeah.
His wife Liv is a writer,
Yeah.
you're a writer, they have 2 children, a boy
I
and a
never
girl.
thought about this.
You have to- Okay. No, but I was, when I was writing during the pandemic, because we couldn't go out and research, and so you have the walls around you and what's inside your head. And I wrote a book during the pandemic as well, and it's a lot of things in there are things that I knew well already and were mirrored on experiences, but yeah, so you haven't thought about it, but now think about it and give us a good answer.
About it, yeah, so, well, I'd say you can't live with a psychologist for 29 years and not learn some things about psychology. And I always call it, I call it my, like, I could be an armchair psychologist sort of thing. I always say if Mark missed work, I could pinch hit for him for a couple of days, because I know so much about therapy dynamics and session dynamics, right? Like it just bleeds into your life, right? And so, but I think absolutely the fact that I wrote this book in the pandemic, hiding from my family in the basement, not really, but right, everybody was home and everybody was taking all that internet space and,
Yes.
right, like the
Yeah.
house was full and, I thought it was a lot. I really struggled in that way during the pandemic, like with having everybody around and not having that space. So I definitely think that Gregory being like, my family, hiding from my family, that the protagonist being that position where he's sort of withdrawn from his family probably was influenced by the pandemic for
Yeah.
sure. But it was also just interesting. It was a gift also to have my husband say, I said, I'm starting this book and it's coming out really fast and it's not a clinical psychologist. How are we doing with that? And he's like, great. And I would show him the pages and he would correct them, or he'd say, oh, this isn't how the therapy dynamic would go, or he would help me fine tune it. So that was the wonderful part, being able to run upstairs after I did pages and say, look at this, and is this right? And then he'd correct them. I'd like cover in the doorway and watch him as he would take his pen and, he would ask me, he'd say, how long is this gonna take? And I'd say, probably 10 minutes at the most. Honestly, it'd be an hour and a half later. Go into it, he'd be like, oh, I think what he'd say is this. So in my situation, I would say this. So.
And did he weigh in on all the marital scenes as well, or?
No, I had no.
No, Gregory doesn't say that to Liv. No, Liv doesn't say that to Gregory.
Yeah, no, those are all mine. Those are all mine.
Did he read those? And
Oh, yeah, no.
how do you feel about those?
No, I think he really liked the book, and he was such a participant in the book. I could never have written this book without him. It was really the impact of living with him and being so privy to so much of his information that gave me this book. And right now I'm trying to write about a musician. I'm like, oh geez, do I have to start dating a musician? What do we do?
But no, what I think is so great about that situation, and you can see it in this book, is that when you're not as concerned with the sort of details of life, the logistics of the characters, where they live and all that, how old the children are. I mean, it matters a little bit in the book. But then when you can just let that go and maybe base it on things that you already know so well, it allows you to go into the interior of their lives, into their minds, into the guts of the relationship. It almost doesn't matter that Liv was a writer. I mean, it's convenient because she's very aware and she thinks about things in a very introspective way, but she didn't have to be. She could have been anything else. It's not pivotal to the plot, and maybe just letting her be a writer, sort of. And I find sometimes when I do that, it gives me the freedom to focus on the other stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like I'm not interested in writing a book that happens on a superficial level where twist, right? That's the plot twisting, not me twisting. That's but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the depth of the story and telling a really deep story, and that is true, right? When now I've got the psychology down, I don't have to spend a year studying psychology to understand this character. So now I can just go right into the heart of the emotion. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting back to the Walker now. I said I would, and I'm doing it. Because I felt that was, it's like, I get the genesis of the story with the stalker and understanding the psychology. And then we have this layer of this dark secret, which is, playing into really the nuts and bolts of this plot, what makes it tick. And the psychology of Gregory and why his life is in the state that it's in. But then you take it a step further and go back to his relationship with his father. And I don't want to give too much away because it's just such a rich moment when you realize how that plays into the reasons why he kept this secret. Where did that come from? Because I know you wrote a memoir, and is that something that has always fascinated you, sort of the secrets from childhood in terms of the family unit and how it plays out into adulthood? Or
Yeah, I think I am fascinated, and I'm a Scorpio. What are you? Taurus. Oh, okay, my sister's a Taurus. Scorpio, right, Rich?
Yeah.
Secrets, all about secrets, right? We love our secrets. Any other Scorpios? Right? Yeah, so there's something, I've always been so interested in secrets. I mean, who doesn't love a secret, right? I mean, that doesn't seem like it, something new to me. Like, oh, she's interested in secrets. What an interesting person. But I feel like I think secrets are really interesting, and family secrets are so interesting, right? And they just kind of infect everything. This one knows this one doesn't know that. And so I feel like I'm always happy to play with secrets. And my memoir, which is basically about me looking for a connection to my parents and trying to wade through these dark secrets. I'm also looking for a chest of hidden gold buried somewhere in Brooklyn. So there's like secret codes you have to unlock. So give me secrets. Yeah. And I'll write about secrets, and like, what could be more interesting? I mean, you have secrets in your book too.
Yes,
Like that's
yes.
Wendy has her book of What Remains is wonderful. I just flew through it a couple weeks ago when it came out, and dark layered characters, great twists. But a lot of secrets, right? Like
lots of
secrets drive
secrets.
up.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier about so many of the themes, turning the tables and on a profession.
Yeah.
Secrets, and also this sense of not being known to people around you that you love, and then not being able to feel their love because you don't believe it's real, because they're not really seeing you. So what they're loving is just this facade, and that's in both of our books as well. And it's so interesting how these themes can be used in completely different stories and books, and they just resonate because they're so deeply human. So
Universal themes, right?
universal themes, and so a fabulous book. I know we have to leave time for questions. So we are gonna open it up to questions, and I just want to say, everybody who has the book, read it immediately, and if you haven't bought it yet, buy the book. It's so wonderful. And now we will take questions.
I want to say one more thing, because I started thinking about this as we were talking about Madison. My cousin Faye is here. When I was 13, my cousin Faye, my sister, and I lived at my grandmother's shack over in Clinton, the next town over, and literally a shack. It was on the Indian River, which spills into the Sound, the harbor, and then the Sound. And that summer, this is another connection, a Madison connection. That summer, we washed our clothes on a washboard with lye soap. Like we had a rowboat, but it had a hole in it. So when Faye and Betsy would row, and I would bail with the chlorine. I used to play in the marsh, like at low tide, like I can still smell the marsh at low tide around here. And it was this very freeing summer. I was away from my home. Faye's mom had just passed. And it was the three of us and my grandmother, who was a beautiful cook, just taking care of us. A lot of games of setback, a lot of swimming. And I think that summer, I was 13, about to be 14. And I think that summer made me a writer in certain ways, like paying attention to, like to all of the sensory details of life, just because there were no distractions. And there it was. And coming back here and speaking to a full house at RJ Julia and seeing my cousin in the audience who gathered people here, and just a reminder of like these shore towns and my childhood and how this moment connects so deeply to that moment. Like, what does a writer do? We go around with our antenna out all day, right? Just picking up details and paying attention to senses and smells and feelings and secrets, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that summer in many ways gave me something very, very powerful that stayed with me for the rest of my life. It hit me at a pivotal moment when I kind of needed it. So before I open to questions, I just want to recognize that this area down here is really important to me. So.
Yay. A wonderful journey. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone have any questions?
How does teaching writing impact on you? What do you think about
I tell my students to do things, and then I can do them myself. I remember my dive instructor saying, this was years ago, I did scuba diving lessons, and he said, whatever you do, don't smoke when you're diving. And he got it from that dive, and then he lit a cigarette, and he's like, do as I say, not as I do. So I feel like it's a little bit of that sometimes. I tell them to really be very specific, turn to technology, spend a lot of time just with journals, paying attention. And I don't always do that, but when I do it, when I tell my students to do something, it reinforces what I should be doing. Also, when you teach writing, you have to go really deeply into text. And that's fabulous because it forces you to reread text, which is how writers learn. You don't need an MFA program. What you need to do is read deeply. So I might not want to read that particular essay that I'm teaching for the fourth time again, but every time I do, I think I learned something about structure and the theme. And so when I'm actually really paying attention and in the teaching moment, I think it reinforces my own writing, makes me a stronger writer. I love teaching writing. I absolutely love it. I love college students. They're so fun. We have a couple.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, and I think too, knowing the rules, then you know when you're breaking them and you're breaking them with a purpose. So, I've had to learn as I've gone because I didn't study writing when I was, in college. And every time I get a rule or a tool, and then I figure out, okay, well, I'm going to break it here, but with an intention.
Yeah.
So I think it's,
And I love that when you tell the students that they can write fragments.
yeah.
What? I'm like, yeah, but you have to learn the rules to break them, right?
You have to
Picasso
know
couldn't
it,
put like
yes.
noses on the, belly buttons until he knew how to actually draw a figure.
And so we do it belonged on a face,
Right.
right? And he was putting in the wrong.
Yeah,
spot
the
for-
same with
Yeah.
writing. You need to know the rules, and then I say, learn the rules properly, and then you can break them with a flaw.
Yes.
And so that's fun too, to kind of watch their development and to watch them really get down the foundations and the fundamentals, and then play with them, which is what writers do all day.
Anyone else? That means we did a great job because
We covered
all
everything.
things were covered.
Hey, what about me?
Yeah, good question.
I'm curious, for both of you, does writing energize you or exhaust you? So when you're done with your how do you feel?
Yeah, the writer William Zinsser said, I hate to write, but I love to have written. Right, and I've got a little bit of that in me, except for Wednesdays at 1. But everything else, it's a little bit painful while I'm in it. And there's a Freedom app. Do you know the Freedom app? You put it on your computer and it shuts down the entire internet, so you can't like browse shoes or anything. And
Now we know one of your.
my license, if I just have some better shoes for my bookstore, I think my whole novel will be better. So, but it's just, that is great, and it's like $25 a year is the best money I could spend. You could program it. Does anybody know this app? It just shuts everything down. So, there's some ways to get in, but you have to work hard.
Yeah.
So, and you just program it for an hour. And so then when I really black out, really block out the distractions, I'm in it, but I do have a problem when I'm sort of, it's a little distraction.
Yeah, I have to write first thing in the morning
Yeah.
because it is painful, and if I do anything else, then I'll just keep doing that. Even if it's like cleaning the bathroom, folding laundry, I will do anything. And so I just go right to wherever I'm gonna write, and I can't write at a desk. I have to pretend I'm like lounging, so I have to have my feet up with a blanket and my coffee on a little tray and my laptop. I'm like, I'm not writing, I'm relaxing. I'm my pajamas, and I open the laptop, I'm like, oh, the screen is blank, and it's like, it's, yeah.
Writers have a lot of rituals.
Oh my gosh, it's very hard because it takes, and so to your question, it does, I am exhausted at the end, but it's a different kind of exhaustion. We were talking about doing events and how we're sort of introverted, but then you can have this amazing extroverted energy, but I will go home and be like, oh, like, because it's a different energy, and writing is an introverted energy. And it's tiring, but like you said, it feels so good when it's done. Yeah.
And this is where it's handy to be married to your psychologist. Seriously, right? At the
I
end
need
of
to
the
get
day,
one of those, I think.
Yeah, I recommend.
For plots and all other things.
This isn't a question, but when I was reading the book, and I didn't know anything about the book, I didn't know anything about you, it was here when I came for another talk, and they said, hey, she's coming soon, why don't you get it, you gotta have it. So I'm reading it and I'm thinking, who the hell would ever say that and do that? I was getting angry that some of the reactions of the people in the book seemed like, I don't know anyone who would do that the second time or the third time, and I was really reacting, and I thought, this is really funny because I don't usually get that vested in the character.
Yeah.
So I was so afraid that it would be tied up too nicely. And so the way the whole thing really worked very well for me in a different way, and I read a lot of books.
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
I thought that was
I
kind of
was
cool.
sure you were gonna say, so I threw it across the room.
And I'm only here for the wine and cheese.
Thank you. That's nice to hear that, that I wanted it to be a slightly unusual book, actually, right?
Yeah.
So, and as
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
that worked
the
out.
twist it takes.
Yeah.
So I was just doing a podcast interview today, and we were talking about this very thing about creating characters that are going to challenge readers, and they may not like them, they may disagree with what they're doing, but there's a reason that we're doing that. There's a reason we're making these characters not what you would expect, because we're trying to create conflict and to sort of show their dysfunction, their distress, and so it's, if the characters were all doing things the way they should, then it would, I guess, not really be be about.
And novels aren't like life.
Yeah.
I mean, novels are constructs, right?
Yes.
There are these in which everything echoes in this, it's an echo chamber. And you create a storyline and everything coalesces around this, the subplot, the plot, the characters' careers. So Victor Shklovsky, a Russian formalist, says, there's a word that he uses. It's like you create this sort of, I can't remember, he uses a Russian formalist kind of word. So how would I remember that? I can't remember it, Julia Cameron. But multitudinousness, that's it. Multitude. So you're creating these worlds that echo, but a novel isn't like life. If you go to a novel, if you write a novel and you're like, in real life, this would happen, you will never sell that novel, right? Yeah, I'm not, I'm not trying to tell you something, but that's kind of it. That speaks to that point, right? That strange things happen in novels. And then, we're estranging the story.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that it does. The way she brings it together, right, is really, it explains why these characters are behaving the way they are. So yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just heard an interview recently with a fairly well-known editor. talking about his relationship with his writers. I wondered if that's.
That's my editor. My relationship with my editor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important to trust your editor. I had, you're assigned an editor. In my case, I was assigned an editor. And you have to sort of, almost speaking to that point, right? Sometimes they want you to do things or change things, or they see things a different way, and you have to decide where to stand your ground and where to give a little bit, and you have to be able to pull back. It's a balancing act, and if you have a good editor, which I do, you're very, very lucky to come out of it with your book feeling more like your book, even more true and better. But I've had a lot of friends who have not had good experiences. So I don't have that well-known editor, but I have an editor, and it was a wonderful, hard process to go to. I've got this book, and you bought my book, and you paid money for my book, so you must love my book. Wait, you want me to change all of it? Like, what? So it's hard. Yeah, the editing process is almost as hard as writing sometimes, I find. Yeah.
And I tell myself I'm really flexible. Like if you were to ask me like, oh, how are you? I'm like, I am not like one of those writers. I'm super flexible. I love feedback. Nothing's too precious for me. I can change anything. I don't think everything I write is great. But then in reality, when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, it's really hard.
Lay off my
And I'm like,
character.
what do you mean? Of course it works. It worked. Don't you see it works?
Yeah.
And then when you go, and then when you go and sit down, you're like, oh, I guess it doesn't really work. And then you can come up with something that's even better, but that process is really hard.
Yeah, no, it's.
Yeah.
it's hard.
Because it's like a puzzle. It's like, imagine you finish a puzzle
Yeah.
and you put the last piece in and you found it like in the carpet somewhere, because you dropped it and you're like, I found it, I put it in, like, there's the puzzle.
Yeah.
And then someone comes in and is like, no, you did it wrong.
Yeah.
And to your eye, all the pieces fit
Yeah.
together, the picture makes sense. And then someone's saying, no, those pieces don't fit together, and it's not the picture that it was supposed to make.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like a leap to undo the puzzle
Oh, yeah.
that you struggled so hard to get, to get in place.
Yeah, that's really good book. Yeah.
So this is actually not a question, but a comment. I love this format. This is only the second time I've been to one of the book presentations where you have two authors. And you two are bright, engaging, and funny. You could do a road trip. But it does make such a difference because often the author comes,
Yeah.
reads a passage, which is lovely. But when you leave, you don't really get a sense, they don't want to tell you too much about the book. You've read the book.
Yeah.
You're an author, you're a writer. I mean, and your questions have been so targeted that it gives everyone an excitement about reading.
And we have good lipstick, by the way.
Yes, great lipstick.
Very carefully.
Yeah, we distract you with our accessories. Thank you. Let's see.
Yes.
I had a comment, maybe a question. I think I asked you a week or two ago, when do you know that you made it? Was it when you signed your contract or when you got the offer from the publishing company? But I would say that you appear in here at RJ Julius.
Oh. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. This is actually a moment for me for all the aforementioned reasons about this place and having all of you here, so many familiar faces who came and braved the weather and 95 at rush hour. It was, Wendy took like 2.5 hours to get here from Stanford, so.
It's all good.
Yeah, it's all good, so thank you.
Can you share your favorite line, which is my favorite line? Without spoiling anything?
Dan read the book and then he texted me my favorite line, and he texted me a line that he picked up and I was like, damn, it's my favorite line. What's the line, Dan? Say? I don't know, it doesn't ruin anything. Why are you acting like Indian takeout is the fucking problem?
I love a line with the F-bomb.
Right.
Love it. Yes.
Yeah,
Every time.
Those are my, 10 favorite. Yeah. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.